Today we're going to talk about the Czech Pirc Defense, which is the only opening that you need to know as black, and maybe as white too. I learned this opening from National Master Robert Ramirez, so a big shout out to him if he's watching this video. This opening was originally made to be played against 1e4 from white, but National Master Robert Ramirez makes this work against pretty much anything that white plays. And not only that, he also makes this work if you're playing white too. So if you know more or less where your pieces go, you can play this opening as a system against pretty much whatever your opponent plays. Let's take a look at the moves from the black's perspective. Remember, you can replicate the same moves as white if you are playing white. So here, originally this was made to be played against e4, but let's take a look with e4, and if your opponent plays anything else, you can pretty much follow the same idea. You're going to play d6. Tricking your opponent into thinking that you're playing a normal Pirc defense. They're going to be playing probably d4, taking the center, and you play knight f6, still a normal Pirc defense. But after your opponent plays knight to c3, let's remember a lot of people blunder this pawn right here because they forget this pawn is under attack. So if they play knight c3, I like to play this move actually to defend the pawn. But if your opponent defends the pawn, you just play c6. And this is where you surprise your opponent. They are not expecting you to play this move. They're actually expecting you to play, for example, this and fianchetto the bishop. And then you castle, and then you start an attack here. Somehow, this is the typical Pirc defense, very similar to the King's India defense. Sometimes they mix up. But here you're going to play c6. This is the Czech defense or Czech Pirc defense. It's a variation of the Pirc defense, and it's very interesting because your opponent is not expecting this move. It's very unusual, and your opponent might not be prepared against this, so they might think, well, what the heck is that? I'm going to just develop my pieces normally, so they're going to play something like knight f3, and you're going to play this move, confusing your opponent even more, queen to a5. And this move, the purpose of this move is actually you are pinning this knight, and this knight is no longer defending the central pawn because this is the only defender of the central pawn. When you pin it, it's no longer defending it, so you're actually threatening to take this pawn. And if your opponent is not aware and play a move like, let's say, bishop here or even bishop here, you can go ahead and grab this pawn, and it's a free pawn. And this works many times, guys, and you can see this in multiple games on the Lead Chess database. But actually, the most common moves here for white to defend against this is playing the bishop here to defend the pawn, or playing this move to break the pin. Sometimes unusual moves like queen here also happen, but the most common moves are, for example, bishop to d2 is one of the common moves here to break the pin. And whenever this bishop comes here and your queen is in the same diagonal, this knight is actually threatening to do some discoveries. So we have to move this queen away. We can safely put the queen here on c7. It's a safe square. Whenever this bishop is here, aiming at your queen, you can just move it back to here. And from here, we're still supporting this advance, which is a great idea in this opening. The main idea actually to play e5 here, and we have a bunch of support here from the pawn and from the queen. So here, after white plays like bishop to d3, you can just play e5. And then after white castles, you move along with your plan. And here, you just have to know more or less where your pieces go. And the queen might be here or here. This knight will be usually here. And this bishop, you're going to develop it to this square. This bishop can come here, or maybe in this square, if the knight is here to be pinned against the queen, that's possible. If this pawn is pushed, then you might reconsider maybe playing the bishop here. This knight's gonna come here usually, maybe reroute the knight to this position or this position if this pawn is not here. And this is more or less where your pieces go. You're gonna develop this bishop castle, put this bishop here or here, and then you're gonna play this knight here. And this is pretty much it. This pawn remains here in case your opponent takes. You're going to recapture. For the most part, you're not going to capture this pawn. You're going to wait for your opponent to capture it, and then you recapture, opening up this file. Of course, your opponent doesn't have to go for that. If they play, for example, bishop to d3, you can go ahead and play e5, and you still keep the pin around here. And when you play this move, your opponent might take. If they take, you just recapture. You know that this is the typical move. If they take your pawn, you take back, and you're good to go. You just have to remember where your pieces go. Bishop here or here. This bishop comes here. This knight's gonna come here probably. And that's it, guys. In case white plays this move, you just drop your queen back. This is the typical variation, and it usually goes like that. Opponent's gonna castle, you're gonna play bishop to g4. They play the bishop out, knight b to d7. After h3, you can trade this this bishop for the knight. After white recaptures, you can develop the bishop to e7, like I said before. And after white takes, you recapture. Whenever they take the pawn, you just capture back. After a move, let's say like a3, you castle. And this is a pretty easy game for you. We can simply play this opening against pretty much anything that white does, and it works all right. So if you need let's say a special opening here that works against pretty much anything, you can go ahead and play this. And it's an interesting opening that is like a jack of all trades that you can use against pretty much anything that your opponent throws at you. And you can also play this as white. You just have to remember that you should start with d3 in the case of white, because you're gonna be flipping up the board here, but you can basically play the same system. You just have to remember more or less where your pieces go. So if you like this video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more, hit the notification bell icon so you receive notifications whenever I post a new video, and like the video, comment down below, and as always, I see you guys in the next video.